So can you give me some bullet points on the Data Privacy Act that has come out in 2023, a long-awaited Data Privacy Act that has come out? What do you think? What are some of the key highlights from
Mhm.
your eyes? And you've been part of the committee as well, so you can probably throw in a lot more insights and break it
That's
down
right.
for a layman, what
That's
it
right.
means.
So that's a great segue, Venkatesh, into what is currently, front and center in everybody's attention, and what is going to really, really shape the course of the data economy in India.
Mhm,
This bill has been in the works for the last 3 years, starting with the
mhm,
Sri Krishna Committee report.
mhm,
It's been through a bunch of changes. Somewhere along the way, the scope got changed, saying that we should also cover non-personal data.
mhm,
But a lot of industry feedback, and to the government's credit, they've been very open to engaging with people like us from a FICCI and other such
mhm,
institutions.
mhm,
Finally, the directional decision that the MeitY is the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. That's it. That's the arm of the government which has really put this
yeah,
together. What the MeitY finally decided directionally after a lot of feedback was we shall simplify. We
mhm,
will keep it very, very specific to a single purpose called privacy and data protection, and not muddle it with too much scope and too much of bells and whistles.
mhm,
So from a intent perspective, their goal is very, very clear that we need a law which ensures adequate protection for citizens' data
mhm,
with little to no disruption in day-to-day business operations,
mhm,
but a very, very clear uh, paradigm shift in terms of how data is handled and processed by people
mhm,
who are in, as you call it, the data business, right?
mhm,
Um, there is obviously a huge $1 trillion economy, digital economy goal that the government is consistently being pursuing. So
mhm,
we see this as an enabler. A safe, protected data ecosystem is necessary. I mean, you have to feel secure, you have to feel safe that your data is not being misused if you have to
mhm.
participate in the data economy, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The other few things that directionally that they have chosen to go down the path. One is they're saying that this law applies only to digital data.
Mhm,
If the data is in a paper form, it's out of scope, right?
mhm,
However, if that paper gets scanned and digitized, it's now within the ambit, right?
mhm, mhm, mhm,
Right? And you can see the intent over here that if a person, if an average Joe wants to be assured that his rights are protected,
mhm.
um, you trade off security for transparency,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah.
You participate in the formal economy, right?
Mhm, mhm,
Whereas hitherto you were data dark for whatever reasons, right?
mhm,
You make the trade-off by saying, okay, I will open up my data, I will digitize it in some form or
mhm,
manner in exchange for better services, faster, secure processing, and the
mhm,
might of the law being behind you. That's the
mhm,
first most important trade-off that data principles start making,
mhm, mhm.
right? Instead of
Yeah,
keeping stuff under your pillow,
mhm.
it's
Yeah,
now in some digital database.
yeah.
Automatically, the government has got your back. The law
Mhm.
has got your back. Right?
Yeah.
The flip side to that is a lot of data fiduciaries, right?
Mhm,
Will need to go a mindset change, and this is the hard part, right? Till now, there's been this greed for getting as much data as you can, whether or not you need it. Dekha jayega, right? Mil raha hai data, you're getting data, just grab it with both hands, stuff it in
yeah,
some warehouse. We'll figure out what to do with it later.
yeah,
That behavior will need to change. I think the guiding principle is going to be data minimization and purpose limitation. Right?
yeah.
If you don't need to know what car I drive in order to give me a EMI, then
Mhm.
don't ask me, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, makes sense.
So
I connected back to this Netflix series that came. I think it was called
uh-huh,
Inconvenient Truth. I
uh-huh,
think Inconvenient Truth. I forgot the name. There was a Netflix series around the social economy,
The social
Facebook, and
network. Yeah.
around the entire. And then somebody out there mentioned that exactly the point you mentioned, that there has to be a responsibility of people who are collecting data. And one way to make sure that the responsible behavior is enforced is the idea was to have something called as a data tax, a
Mm-hmm.
tax for every byte of data that you have for the citizens or the user. So there's a very interesting thought process. Here you're not talking about taxation, but you're talking about, in principle, the data fiduciary should show some responsibility in terms of the data, the purpose for which they collect, right? So
Correct.
it seems like a conceptually a step in the right direction, and the law is behind you, probably in
Exactly.
this case through some sort of penalties or something. But yeah,
Exactly right.
continue your line of thought. Sorry to interrupt, but I
No
felt,
problem at all.
yeah, yeah,
I mean, this is a conversation, Venkatesh, not a
yeah.
not a monologue. Hopefully, right?
Mhm.
See, there are a few nuances that it is important to keep in mind when you're running a data business, right?
Yeah.
You have to first ask yourself: are you a data fiduciary, which
Hmm.
means the person who makes the decisions of what data is collected, why it is collected, how it will be processed and retained? If you're
Hmm.
making those decisions, you're the fiduciary.
Hmm.
However, if you're a
Hmm.
payment gateway who simply just processes the transaction, for example, then you're a
Hmm.
processor. Right?
Hmm.
You don't get to make the decisions of what data needs to be collected, so on and so forth. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So in our concept, in our context, from what I told you about what Perfios does, we
Hmm.
essentially carry out processing instructions on behalf of, let's say, an SBI or an HDFC bank. Right?
Hmm.
The relationship is very clear, and we've been in fairly intense conversations internally and with our clients to figure out, how we should reorient ourselves to this new law. One thing is
Hmm.
clear that these financial institutions, for the right reasons, continue to be the data fiduciaries.
Yeah.
People like us, people like, let's say, maybe a Razor Pay, so on and so forth, until they get licensed, continue to
Hmm.
be your processors.
Okay. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And
It makes sense. I mean, so you are the data processors and the endpoints will be the fiduciaries.
correct.
And is it fair to say that this Privacy Act is applicable more to the fiduciaries in terms of their handling of data than to the processors, or it goes both ways?
No, its scope is limited to fiduciaries,
Okay.
and almost every fiduciary is covered by, let's say, in the banking industry, there is something called an IT outsourcing guidelines, right?
Okay.
So it is the fiduciary's job to make sure that any processor or third party that they use to
Hmm.
handle processing or whatever of data, there is
Hmm.
adequate supervision, audit trails, so on and so forth, and no data commingling, all the things that
Yeah.
go through the audit part.
Yeah.
So the regulators and the policymakers are very clear that, listen, we don't have the capacity to supervise and monitor hundreds of thousands of entities or lakhs of entities, right?
Hmm.
We will
Hmm.
catch the fiduciaries whose business depends on this data, make sure
Hmm.
that they kind of behave responsibly.
Okay.